in France today. I now know what happened to them. I'm glad. I can rest now. I will publish my mother's book. She would have wanted that.
My name is Iris Price, and I was working as a secretary in London office when the war broke out in 1939. Britain was scared of the war, and we all wanted peace. For months nothing had happened. Hitler's armies had invaded Western Europe and France had surrendered. British troops had been rescued from the beaches of Dunkirk. There was not much hope. Only the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, believed that Britain wouldn't fall. Women couldn't fight, but I had a new job as a radar operator in Kent. In September 1940, Britain was undefended. The radar station was bombed and two female workers had died. Britain was exhausted and very worried. There were lots of air raids. In December 1940, Hitler had called off the invasion for now, and the RAF had prevailed. There were bad air raids, but Britain was determined. In January 1943, the war dragged on, but Britain was no longer alone. Britain was full of American GI soldiers training for some future attack on mainland Europe. Rationing, bombing was shortest part of life. Allies recaptured North Africa. I was working in the forces on an air base in East Anglia. My friends and I regularly dated GI soldiers, but we didn't get too involved in case they never came back. In September 1944, there was a successful invasion of Normandy. I was parted from my American fiancé. He had landed on the beaches in D-Day, and we had plans to live in America when the war was over. He was now fighting his way across Europe. In June 1945, the war was over. Britain was exhausted but victorious. I was due to leave the army and return to my secretary job. Rationing continued. My fiancé arrived back in Britain on leave. We talked about going to live together in the USA. Then he broke the news to me that he was already married. I was devastated and exhausted.
I'm going to tell you about Ivan Euston, a young man sent to war at just 19. He was quite worried about having to fight and train as a soldier, as he knew he was the right age. Even though he was just a reserve, he was almost in the centre of it all. But there was hope, because they were told that the Soviet Union would be protected and they wouldn't be affected too much by Hitler, and the USSR agreeing to split Poland. At this point, he would be in the full depth of the war. He had to fight. Every acquaintance he accomplished was lost, distorting Ivan with grief. All his friends were dying around him. To make matters worse, Ivan had suffered heavy casualties, and so therefore he was in immense pain, fighting for his country and fighting for his life. Ivan was in constant fear now. He had moved back to his hometown to protect it. But he was isolated. If he tried to retreat, he'd be shot by the secret police. Nor was he allowed to contact his family. He was not only scared for his life, but for his family. He was completely alone. He knew he was probably going to die at his battlement, as they had a lack of equipment. To his advantage, he had an inspirational commander who managed to spur them on. In 1942, life was hell for Ivan. He had been moved up to a higher ranking to sniper. Nearly everyone around him was dead. Even the new recruits only lasted about 24 hours. He'd been affected for the rest of his life. The trauma, exhaustion and fear would be there forever. In 1943, Ivan was sick and tired. He'd been forced to lose all empathy, as he was now a killing machine, but only because he had no choice. The terrors of war had definitely got to him. Ivan was a proud veteran, but mentally destroyed, even more by the 25th of January 1945. Seeing a few of his inmates starving and dying, seeing such massive death and the traumas that had gone on at a concentration camp, shaken by the hell-worthy survivors' stories. Ivan, by the end, had now lost all feeling due to his traumas, a pure killing machine, not knowing about his family or anything else for that matter. He was now drinking all he could and raping all the women if they did not hide. He'd rape about 20 a day. He was a proud survivor. He had survived and proud of his country, but a completely different person to the 19-year-old he had left as a reserve. He was left crazy.
My name is Jessie Andrzejewski. I am a Catholic writer. In 1939, I wanted to keep up writing stories and books, but with Germans invade, I wasn't allowed to publish any more books and I had to work in a factory. I was very angry at how Polish people were treated. I had to become a member of the underground Home Army to dispute the Germans. Members of the government were often caught, tortured and shot. In 1944, I knew it was only a matter of time before Germans were defeated. They were hoping that the Soviets would send them help, but the Soviets did not want the future government of Poland to have connections with London, so he didn't get any help. But we beat the Germans. The Soviets were swept into Germans defeat the Nazis. The Poles are trying to pick up the pieces of their lives and their homes. Poland was forced to accept communist government, but after all that, in 1945, I could not write without thinking about what the government would say about his work.
Miep Gies just have died a few years ago. However, her stories amazed lots of people. She met Otto Frank when she applied for the post of temporal secret in his company, Opikata, 1940. Jews become subject to persecution. However, Miep regard all this as horrific nonsense. Still really close to Frank's family. Life became more and more difficult for Frank's family. Miep decided to help them. When Frank's family hide in their company, Green police arrested the people hiding in there and release her friends who helped the people there. Good thing is no one reads the diary which Frank's daughter wrote it down, because all the help's name is on the diary. Many Dutch people have resisted the Nazis and risked their lives to save other Dutch people who were also Jewish. Otto Frank survived the concentration camp and returned to New Zealand. His wife was dead, and he was trying to find his daughter and daughters. They confirmed they both died a few weeks ago. Miep gave Annie's diary to Otto Frank. That's the diary which we read now.
Hello, my name is Olga Ivavonia. I was born in Leningrad, Russia. This is my story. When war broke out, I was 19. I was a normal girl. I had prospects, dreams. Get married, have children, move into a home. At the start of the war, I wasn't really affected. Not until summer 1941, when my boyfriend went away. He went on to work on the front line. But I was kept busy, and I didn't think about it too much because of the work. It was doubly hard now that most of the men had gone. Life took an awful turn for me in January 1941, when we were taken under siege by the Germans. People were dying of starvation. All food was stopped from going in and out. I was surrounded by people starving to death, people being shot around me. My family were using floorboards as firewoods. We barely had enough to live on. In spring, we were brought some comfort, although thousands of us had died, and many were reduced to cannibalism. This was because some of the food was finally allowed to get in. Hope was brought to us again in August 1942, when the Leningrad was played in our city. Finally, in January, the city was still besieged, but finally supplies were able to get through more easily. Life was hard, but not as hard as it had been before. I got a letter from my boyfriend. It was a year overdue. January 1944 was a joyful time for me and Mother. The siege was lifted. Life returned to how it had been before, but there was still no word from him. In spring of 1945, the Great Patriotic War was over. Hitler was dead. The war was finally over, but my world was shattered. My friends dead, my boyfriend gone. But I have hope for the future. That was my story of war.
Hello, my name is Paul Heine. I was a 9-year-old boy when Britain declared war on Germany. I was really excited and played war games with my friends. I was always surprised because my father wasn't as excited for the war as me. 1940. I loved the radio. Every time Germany had stories, they had defeated countries. My father had been called up into the army. I was so proud of my dad, even in his new smart uniform. I promised my dad that I would look after my mum, but she was always sad. 1942. After he left, when I heard the news that my dad had got killed in the Soviet Union, I was devastated. I was told by my teacher that my dad had died a hero. Hitler sent my family a thank you letter for the sacrifice for Germany. My mother became sad and my grandmother had to come in and help with the housework. Suddenly my mother became ill, but I was not that worried and I was to work really hard. I joined the Hitler's Youth and enjoyed it so much. We practiced sport and planning for the war are useful jobs and first aid. 1943. My town got bombed by the Americans and British. Thousands of people died. We were sent out to help people who were injured. People's houses were badly damaged that they had to move out to the other side of the town. Suddenly news on a war was not as exciting. Food began to run out and winter was hard. Families were homeless due to bombing, and it seemed most families had lost someone. My mother was still ill. My grandmother was still in the house and helping. I never spoke to her about war. I didn't understand why she didn't like Hitler as much as I did. School was closed, so I spent most of my time with the Hitler's Youth. Early 1945. American troops arrived and took over the town. All the Nazis in the area were arrested. I was rounded up too and told that the war was nearly over and Germany was defeated. I was so confused because these people were saying Hitler and Germany were evil. Hitler was dead. I was back in school. There were new teachers who told us that we had been taught was evil and wrong. We were forced to watch films about victims of concentration camps. Some Germans were saying these films were fictional, made by the Americans, but the American troops weren't overall that bad. They even gave you chocolate if you were prepared to be helpful.